Hey everybody, welcome to this week's Q&As. I don't think there's too many questions this week, but let's jump in and see what we got. First up, over on Floatplane, Mike said they finally got around to trying downscaling to their CRT in order to watch old music videos. Social distortion right now, and it's amazing how much better it actually is. Stuff that looked like a weird mess on their flat panel looked like actual cool effects on the CRT. Are there any cool music videos that myself or anybody who feels like commenting would recommend trying out this way? Genre or music taste doesn't really matter. They just want to be more amazed by these cool things. So first of all, one of the things that you're seeing with the effects is the same thing that you would see in video games, is people doing these effects were editing them on CRTs and previewing them on CRTs, so that's how they were intended to look. But it's not just that. In the VHS video I'm working on, which hopefully I'll be able to share with you supporters very soon, even just the crappy VHS handheld camcorder that I was using, it's actually a very nice one back in the day, but compared to even your cell phone now, it's kind of crappy. But watching it on like a really nice consumer CRT versus even the best scaler, it looked so much better on the CRT. Now, once you start adding CRT simulation effects, that's where things start to change, and it does get to be very close. It's tricky because each panel is different, each size panel, each brightness of panel, yada, yada, yada. So even between like two LG TVs, you could actually have different OLED panels in there. So it's really hard to get the stuff dialed in perfectly, but it is a huge help. But it's never going to be exactly the same as a CRT. It's just impossible to emulate a beam of light drawing on the back of etched glass so fast that it's one line at a time is fast enough to have your persistence of vision retain it. So just the way that CRTs work, it's almost impossible to truly replicate. But yeah, I'm with you 100%. And this is the same, not just with music videos, but TV shows, movies, whatever else. So what do I recommend? Anything that's not already been rescanned and remastered. I could be wrong, but I believe Rammstein rescanned the film from some of their original videos and then re-uploaded them in HD. So that would be probably a better way to watch it, would be the more modern version. Just like people who took the time to do really quality remasters, like the 24-bit mastered for iTunes ones, some of those do sound a little bit better than the original, whereas if they haven't been remastered, finding an old vinyl or cassette through some analog speakers would sound more like the artist originally intended. Same exact thing with CRTs, right? If any of these music videos have been rescanned on film, which aren't many, by the way, mostly just because where's the original film? Who would have kept that back in the day? So if that's already been rescanned and re-uploaded, it might be better in HD, but everything else, it's going to be better then. The only other thing to note is if you find these on YouTube, they're not going to be as good as other sources. I don't know where else you'd be able to get them, by the way. Maybe somebody scanned a VHS copy from back in the day or something, or if they were ever available on Laserdisc. I have no clue, but because even if it was put on 480i, YouTube compresses it. So compressing an already low resolution thing is going to be terrible. But it's, as things change over the years, what was the deinterlacing method used? There's so many what ifs. So that original file could have been changed 20 times over by the time you re-downscale it on your CRT. So it'll still probably look better than a flat panel in almost all cases, but that's just, where you're sourcing these videos is kind of important. I would love to see an archive of this stuff, even if people didn't have the original film of shooting the video. What about the original high quality studio tape version, even with 3.2 pull down in 480i? Those would be really great rescans to do. Just even in its current form, using Doomsday, or heck, even using a RetroTink's better than most of the other solutions that have been out there for years. So yeah, I didn't mean to go on too much of a rant on that, but I've just seen, even myself, I spent an entire week. I think it was more than that, actually. I think it was 2 weeks, because I messed up the first capture. So I spent an entire 2 weeks over the course of whatever time scanning all of my family's home movies. And then I just went and saw them again and realized the equipment I had then, 15 years ago, nowhere near as good as what I have access to now, including just a Tink 5X, by the way. So I'm almost tempted to go back and rescan my favorite bits of those. Everybody has those little memories from childhood that you always kind of want to go back to or share with your family that you have on film. So those were definitely the ones that I would consider rescanning. So sorry for going off on a tangent, but I've just been so deep in this stuff lately that you kind of struck a nerve in a good way, though. So yeah, my recommendations are just anything that you could find on any medium, that even DVD, if you could put that on your CRT, that would probably look great as well. Kind of see what you could find and go from there. Next up, over on Patreon, Quantum Guitar wants to know what's my preferred way to watch 1080i content without an HD CRT or multi-format video monitor. So I'll admit, I don't really have much 1080i content that I'd be wanting to watch, and I don't even really know what's predominantly 1080i. I do remember way back with HD DVD and the beginning of Blu-ray, there were some things that were only 1080i, but I don't think it was very common. So I would love for anybody in the comments, or even you yourself, Quantum Guitar, to chime in on what kind of content you think would be 1080i related, but I could still help with the rest of your question. So just to continue, they imagine an inverse telecine or 2-2 deinterlace would be great, respectively, for reconstructing 24 Hz film or 30 Hz NTSC TV content. Do I know if the Tink 5X is capable of doing these for 1080i inputs along with 480i? No, the Tink 5X can only Bob deinterlace 1080i, and it can't output 24 or 30 Hz. It could only do 5994 or 60. Next, do I know anything about how 1080i is typically deinterlaced for flat panels, and if these alternate reconstructive methods are ever available in consumer players or receivers? I think it's exactly the same as 480i, but I could be wrong. That is a guess, but I just think that those methods are generally the same. It's just applied to the different resolutions. So motion adaptive, bob, weave, and then there were some proprietary ones over the years that were very good, but it's never going to be the same as actually reversing it to its original. And I don't know of any TVs that did that, only higher end video processors. Next, they have a 1080i Blu-ray of a performance of Philip Glass's Einstein on the Beach that they're trying to figure out the best way to play likely on their 1080p plasma display. So that's a good example, but you would really want to research what was the original resolution and frame rate that it was shot in, and then what was the transfer over to the disc. So here's a perfect example. Spoiler alert, in the upcoming Tink VHS video, I show how you can't really run inverse telecine on the X-Files DVDs because almost surely it was shot in film and about 24 frames per second, rounding up here. And then it had 3.2 then it had 3.2 pull down applied, and then it was set to 5994 NTSC, at least for the NTSC DVDs, and then the effects were added to it, just the overlays with the text and everything else, and the scene transitions and whatever. So it's almost impossible to run the inverse telecine because it's got mixed content on it. And I'm not just talking about the Tinks. I'm talking about using software or other different pieces of hardware. And talking to a friend, I think that's actually one of the reasons why it took so long to get onto Blu-ray, because all of that stuff had to be taken into account. So you need to research all of those things if you want to get serious about this. I mean, I think if you got a Tink 4K, you could probably just run the IVTC function and see if it works and just kind of go from there. If you get combing artifacts, it won't. And if you don't get combing artifacts, it's going to work fine. But that would be assuming that it was originally 24 or 30p. So you really have to dig in deep to what the source of the content was. And for video games, in most cases, running it at a lower resolution, like 720p, might actually be better. Shank disagrees with me on this, and Shank has also showed me a few incidents where 1080i might actually look better, but that's almost always on a CRT. So yeah, that's kind of interesting. To continue, though, Quantum Guitar said they found that their Sony UBP X800 Blu-ray player has a cinema conversion mode. So that sounds like if it detects a 3.2 cadence, it'll automatically do the inverse telecine. So I think that you should absolutely try all of that stuff, but you're going to need to use your eyes to decide. And that's whether it's your Blu-ray player, your TV, a tank, whatever. If you see bad combing artifacts, it's not going to work, or you might have to do it in software and then kind of go from there. But if you turn this feature on and all of a sudden you get smooth motion, no flicker, and none of those combing weave looking artifacts, then it's working. And the great thing about stuff like this is if you try it and it doesn't work, there's no harm. It just doesn't work. So yeah, those are all good questions. I wish I had better answers to all of them, but hopefully I was able to at least point you in the right direction. Next up, Tony Escobar said they loved Belmont's question last week and my response. They have a quick follow-up. They have their Amazon set to my page as well, but how do they know they checked out using the affiliate link? That is a really, really nice thing to ask, Tony. Thank you so much. Honestly, and I didn't pay Tony to say that or anything, so thank you very much. How I do it and how I tell my family to do it, who knows if they remember or not, is I just go to support us on the website on the top toolbar. I click on that Amazon link, and then on the top, if you click in the toolbar, you could see it says like /tag equals RetroRGB and a whole bunch of stuff. I will highlight and cut that question mark and everything past it, and then I'll go to the checkout page, and at the very end of that, I'll add that code again. I'll redo the checkout page, and that's it. And then I just hope it works. But I don't even think you need to do it twice. I think if you've gone to the site with that link first and you have stuff in your cart, it should already credit. But Amazon's analytics are very hard to follow, so I don't even know how to figure out how many people purchased one of the links that I created. It's very confusing, and I kind of think they do that on purpose. But so that's what I do. I think it works. And once again, I can't thank any of you enough for even thinking to do stuff like this. It's just such a really nice gesture, and I really appreciate it. And I do think it's very cool that you'd be able to help out the channel without actually spending 1 penny more than you were going to before, but it's still just a really nice thing. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Next up, Jason Guffey said they've long thought they had a 1080p Panasonic Plasma, but they finally gave the manual a good look through and saw it's actually labeled as a 720p screen. It accepts 1080p inputs, so they're assuming it downscales them. But further info, the specs reveal the screen to actually be 1024 by 768. They know this is a semi-common 4:3 PC resolution, but their panel is clearly 16 by 9, so how are they to believe that this digital display does not use square pixels? So this was a thing that was incredibly common 20 years ago now, or mid 2000s, where and it was also common with even like 480p ED TVs, they would call them, not erectile dysfunction TVs, but enhanced definition, not exactly high definition. And it would use a video chip inside to convert whatever signal that you fed it to the native resolution of the panel, and then compensate for the stretch and the mismatched aspect ratio in that software that's built into that chip. So there was a lot of discussions about it. One of the experimental things that Fudo told me to buy is this Faruja box over there that was actually designed for 1366 by 768 panels. So you feed it its native resolution, and it does all of the conversions on that using its much more expensive and higher end processing. So how does it work is very complicated, but it essentially just converts it the same way a video game processor might convert the square pixels of a video game using interpolation to make it the correct aspect ratio while retaining original, while still feeding it those mismatched pixels. So just to continue with Jason's question, they haven't had a chance to tinker much with it, but does this mean native 1024 by 768 input would be stretched to fill the frame? I believe so, yes. Or if you hit the 4:3 button, it would just interpolate back to the middle. What does that mean for actual 720p or 1080p content? You're losing detail and interpolating back into the square or the rectangle that you're feeding it to, but it doesn't necessarily mean it would be bad. And then what would 1366 by 768 be like? Kind of the same thing. It's not going to line up perfectly, so you could never get square pixels for stuff like that. But a lot of TVs were those resolutions back then. And while I didn't get it perfect, a lot of times for average content, you probably wouldn't notice. Also, do plasmas traditionally have good scalers in the first place, at least for 3D content? What about the latency that comes from all this processing? So I have never lag tested old plasmas, only, 2012-ish ones, and it's about 2 to 3 frames of lag. But remember that plasmas refresh so quickly that you get the same reading at the top as you do on the bottom. So 3 frames of latency on a plasma really is more like 2 frames of latency on every other type of flat panel. And the way plasmas work, depending on how your eyes prefer the signal, it might actually be perceived as less latency because of just because of the way the displays work. I kind of go into this in that myth-busting lag video from a while back. I'll leave a link for that if anybody's interested. And lastly, it says, what is the refresh rate? It says it's 600 hertz, which at first they thought that it was a typo, but then it seems like it basically does flash different subpixels in the image at different times, fast enough to create the illusion of a coherent picture. So it needs 10 frames to match the display of 1 frame from a more traditional refresh screen. Do you have that right? Sort of, yeah. I think slow-mo guys have a video where they show how the plasma works in real time, and they use their, $100,000 cameras to get it way slower than I could get it. But it's essentially what you just said, and the way those plasma screens work, you do definitely get a sense of better motion than your average LCD panel, especially of that era. That whole plasma versus LCD thing, that was kind of ridiculous. Each one had its place, but if you're just talking about what looks better for motion, plasmas were always better. I've never seen of that era LCD panels that could even come close to the look of plasma. So they got that part of it right. And I think that 600 hertz, well, you're not truly getting a 600 hertz refresh rate because you have to, as you said, repeat the same frame a couple times. You do notice, from a gaming point of view, you do notice that it feels less latency than you would with, like, if you used your time sleuth on a plasma and on an LCD, and if they both read the exact same in the top left, the plasma is going to feel like it has less latency. Now, that's my opinion. I did kind of back it up with a little bit of fact in the lag video, as well as the discussion I did, that podcast style discussion I did with Nick and Zach. So, yeah, if you're interested, I'll leave links to both of those. But I still love my plasma. I have a 1080p, a true 1920 by 1080 Panasonic 3D plasma that I've kept. I'm using that now in kind of like as a spare TV, but I plan on always keeping it because it's just such a different style display. I imagine 10 years from now, as we look back, there's going to be some content that might actually look like it was more of a fit on the 1080p plasma. Certainly the case with a bunch of Switch games. I think the look of a plasma in 1080p is kind of a benefit sometimes, because when you start putting those on like an OLED TV, you start to see the lower resolution that was scaled in the Switch that was then scaled on the TV. So I mean, obviously, I'm a crazy person that likes collecting different types of displays, though. So, I have an old, really nice CRT VGA monitor here and a newer mid-grade LCD panel that I use as my main one. So I'm probably the wrong person to ask stuff like that. But I personally would always want to keep one just because I think it would be a neat way to just watch certain types of content. So it's cool that you have one. And, I wouldn't necessarily go hunting down any of the other plasmas unless, you're crazy like me and just want to collect them, because you could still get the same similar effect with the one that you have. But I don't know. Let me know what you think. Well, that's it for this week. There weren't too many questions, but I don't ever really care how many questions there are. If there's just a few, I tend to talk a little bit more and give some more detail. If there's a whole bunch, I might have to go a little faster to get through them all, but I've never had to just skip and not answer questions because there were too many. And I kind of like how some of these are shorter than others. And I just always like to try to make these feel like they're laid back and chill, like we're all just hanging out together somewhere. So anyway, if you would like to ask a question, any question you would like, just do it wherever it is that you support in the latest Q&A post. The way the services work, I can't figure out what's a new question on an older post. Plus, I just like scrolling through and having a chat like you saw today. So as always, thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week.